As the day recedes and the world outside softens into twilight, we turn our attention inward, allowing the currents of time to carry us gently to distant shores. History in its essence is a vast and quiet river, its waters flowing ever onward, bearing echoes from ages long past. Each ripple, each eddy, holds a fragment of a story, a whisper from a civilization that once thrived, a life that was lived with purpose and passion. Tonight, we embark on a journey along this tranquil river, seeking out a particular legend, a name that resonates with an enduring power, even across millennia. We will delve into the remarkable existence of Hannibal Barca, a figure whose very name evokes images of ancient might, strategic genius, and unyielding resolve. His is a tale woven into the very fabric of antiquity, a narrative that speaks of empires clashing, of extraordinary ambition, and of a spirit that defied the greatest powers of its era. There will be no urgency in our exploration, no dramatic flourishes, but rather a calm, steady unfolding of events, allowing the weight of history to settle gently upon us. Our purpose is not to ignite excitement, but to provide a quiet space for reflection, a contemplative journey through the annals of time. We will observe the unfolding of Hannibal's life with a neutral gaze, tracing his path from a young boy in Carthage to a formidable general who challenged the might of Rome. Each phase of his existence, each decision, each triumph and tribulation will be presented with a meticulous attention to historical accuracy, drawing from the most reliable accounts that have survived the centuries. Allow the soothing rhythm of this narrative to guide you as we drift through the landscapes of ancient Iberia, across the formidable Alps, and into the heart of Italy. We will witness the grand strategies and the intricate details that shaped the Punic Wars, not as a thrilling spectacle, but as a series of carefully documented historical moments. The story of Hannibal Barca is one of profound historical significance, and it is our privilege to recount it with the quiet authority it deserves, inviting you to simply listen, and perhaps to find a peaceful repose within its depths. Before we delve into the life of Hannibal himself, it is essential to quietly understand the world into which he was born. Our gaze now turns to the ancient city of Carthage, a name that evokes a sense of distant power and faded glory. This was not merely a city, it is but the heart of a vast maritime trading empire whose influence rippled across the western Mediterranean for centuries. Carthage occupied a highly strategic location on the coast of what is now modern-day Tunisia. Its harbours, bustling yet orderly, faced the rich shipping lanes that connected the eastern and western halves of the Mediterranean Sea. From this advantageous position, Carthaginian vessels, sturdy and swift, traversed the waters, establishing a formidable network of trade routes. Their ships carried goods from distant lands, tin from Britain, gold from West Africa, amber from the Baltic, and a multitude of other commodities that fueled the empire's immense wealth. The city itself, though now largely ruins, once stood as a testament to Punic ingenuity and prosperity. Its quiet grandeur lay in its sophisticated infrastructure, its powerful navy, and the disciplined efficiency of its commercial enterprises. The Carthaginian Empire, at its zenith, controlled extensive territories in North Africa, parts of Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and significant portions of the Iberian Peninsula. This vast dominion was not always acquired through conquest, but often through calculated trade agreements and the establishment of peaceful commercial outposts. The wealth generated by this extensive network allowed Carthage to maintain a powerful military, though its primary strength lay in its naval supremacy. This ancient city, with its deep water harbours and its mercantile acumen, quietly dominated the sea lanes, ensuring its prosperity and guarding its expansive interests. It was a civilization built upon the gentle hum of commerce, yet possessing the underlying strength to protect its way of life, a quiet titan of the ancient world. The tranquil existence of Carthage, built upon the steady rhythm of trade, was destined to collide with another burgeoning power across the sea. This inevitable clash manifested as a series of monumental conflicts, collectively known as the Punic Wars. These were not isolated incidents or minor border disputes. They were epic struggles for supremacy, defining contests that would ultimately shape the entire destiny of the ancient Mediterranean world. On one side stood the venerable Carthaginian Empire, a thalassocracy whose strength emanated from its mastery of the seas and its vast commercial networks. On the other, the nascent Roman Republic was steadily expanding its influence across the Italian peninsula, driven by a formidable land army and an increasingly ambitious vision for its future. Both powers, in their own ways, were dynamic and expansive, and the Western Mediterranean was simply not large enough to accommodate the unhindered ambitions of both. The Punic Wars spanned more than a century, unfolding in 3 distinct phases, each marked by immense human cost and profound strategic implications. These were conflicts of attrition, fought across land and sea, from the plains of Italy to the shores of Africa, and within the contested territories of Sicily and Hispania. The stakes were nothing less than complete dominance over the region, and by extension, significant control over its trade, resources, and political landscape. These wars forced both Carthage and Rome to innovate, to adapt, and to endure sacrifices on an unprecedented scale. Naval tactics were refined, military strategies evolved, and the very fabric of society in both states was profoundly impacted by the relentless demands of prolonged warfare. The Punic Wars represent a pivotal chapter in ancient history, a period of intense rivalry and profound transformation, setting the stage for the rise of one power and the eventual decline of another. They were the crucible in which the destinies of 2 great civilizations were forged and ultimately decided. Within the complex political landscape of Carthage, certain families held significant sway, their influence extending across both civilian governance and military command. Among these, the Barcid family stood as a prominent and powerful dynasty, deeply interwoven with the very fabric of Carthaginian statecraft and its martial endeavours. Their name, Barca, itself, is thought to derive from the Semitic word for lightning, a fitting descriptor for their dynamic and often aggressive approach to both politics and warfare. The Barcids were not merely wealthy landowners or influential merchants, they were military leaders and strategists, consistently holding positions of command and shaping Carthaginian policy, particularly in the critical years leading up to and during the Punic Wars. Their prominence was not solely inherited but earned through a succession of campaigns and political manoeuvring, establishing a formidable legacy of service and ambition. At the heart of this formidable lineage was Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's father. Hamilcar emerged as a pivotal figure during the First Punic War, a period of immense challenge and considerable losses for Carthage. Despite the eventual Carthaginian defeat in that conflict, Hamilcar distinguished himself as a brilliant military commander. He was renowned for his tactical prowess and his unwavering determination, even when faced with overwhelming Roman strength. His leadership in Sicily, though ultimately unsuccessful in securing the island for Carthage, demonstrated a strategic mind and a tenacity that would become hallmarks of his family. Hamilcar's experiences in the First Punic War, particularly the bitter taste of defeat and the subsequent harsh terms imposed by Rome, instilled in him a deep-seated resentment and a resolve to restore Carthaginian prestige. This resolve, coupled with his military genius, that laid the groundwork for a dynastic tradition of military leadership and an enduring commitment to challenging Roman dominance. It was into this environment, steeped in military tradition and a fierce anti-Roman sentiment, that Hannibal Barca would be born, inheriting not only a name but a profound legacy of command and ambition. Hamilcar Barca, a name synonymous with Carthaginian resilience, played a crucial and often solitary role in the latter stages of the First Punic War. His strategic genius shone brightest in Sicily, where, despite facing an overwhelming Roman naval advantage and superior manpower, he managed to maintain a tenacious resistance for years. Operating from fortified positions like Mount Eryx, he employed guerrilla tactics and daring raids, frustrating Roman efforts to achieve a decisive victory and proving himself a commander of exceptional resourcefulness. Even in defeat, the terms of the peace treaty acknowledged his formidable reputation, with Rome preferring to negotiate rather than risk further costly engagements against him. The conclusion of the First Punic War, however, did not bring peace to Carthage. The vast mercenary army employed by the Carthaginians, unpaid and disaffected, revolted, plunging the state into the devastating mercenary war. It was Hamilcar Barca who once again stepped forward, demonstrating his unwavering commitment to Carthage. He masterfully suppressed the rebellion, a brutal conflict that nearly brought Carthage to its knees, thereby saving his homeland from internal collapse. This victory further solidified his status as Carthage's most capable military mind and a national hero. Following these arduous struggles, Hamilcar turned his attention westward to Hispania, modern-day Spain. This vast peninsula, rich in silver mines and fertile lands, offered a strategic opportunity to rebuild Carthaginian power and wealth, independent of Rome's immediate sphere of influence. From around 237 BCE, Hamilcar embarked on a systematic campaign of conquest and consolidation, establishing a new Carthaginian empire in Hispania. He founded cities, forged alliances with local tribes, and exploited the region's mineral resources, all with an eye towards strengthening Carthage for future confrontations. Throughout these campaigns, his young son Hannibal was often by his side. The boy witnessed firsthand his father's strategic brilliance, his leadership in battle, and his tireless dedication to Carthage. He observed the intricacies of military command, the art of diplomacy, and the relentless pursuit of a grand vision. This formative period, spent in the shadow of a legendary father, undoubtedly left an indelible impression on Hannibal, shaping his understanding of warfare, power, and the enduring rivalry with Rome. Hamilcar's legacy was not merely a military one. It was a blueprint for an ambitious foreign policy and a profound personal example for his son to emulate. Within the bustling, sun-drenched city of Carthage, a child named Hannibal Barca was born around the year 247 BCE. His arrival into the world occurred during a period of profound transition for his homeland, a time when the echoes of the First Punic War still resonated, and the subsequent mercenary war had just begun to subside. He was the eldest son of Hamilcar Barca, a figure already revered for his military prowess and his unwavering dedication to Carthaginian sovereignty. Hannibal's earliest years were spent within the secure yet undoubtedly purposeful environment of the Barcid household. While specific details of his infancy are lost to time, it is reasonable to surmise that his upbringing was privileged, befitting the son of such a prominent general. The family's wealth and influence would have ensured access to the finest tutors and resources available within Carthage, preparing him for a life of leadership and responsibility. Even in his tenderest years, the atmosphere surrounding young Hannibal would have been permeated by the distinct military ethos of his family. Conversations at meals, the presence of veteran soldiers, and the constant awareness of Carthage's precarious position in the wider Mediterranean world would have subtly shaped his perception. He would have heard tales of his father's campaigns in Sicily, the desperate struggle against the mercenaries, and the strategic vision for a revitalized Carthaginian presence in Hispania. One can imagine the quiet observations of a child, absorbing the narratives of past conflicts and future ambitions. While shielded from the immediate brutalities of war, the concept of rivalry with Rome, the necessity of strength, and the importance of Carthaginian pride would have been woven into the fabric of his daily life. These early influences, though perhaps not fully understood by a young boy, would have laid a deep foundation, fostering an inherent understanding of military strategy and a profound sense of purpose that would come to define his legendary future. The path for Hannibal, though not yet clear, was being subtly illuminated by the legacy and aspirations of his powerful lineage. Among the most enduring anecdotes from Hannibal's early life is the story of his solemn oath. This event, recounted by ancient historians, describes a deeply personal moment between a father and his young son, one that would cast a long shadow over the course of the boy's destiny. It is said that when Hannibal was a mere 9 years old, his father, Hamilcar, was preparing to embark on his ambitious expedition to Hispania, a venture intended to restore Carthaginian fortunes and power after the setbacks of the First Punic War. As Hamilcar prepared to depart, Hannibal, eager to accompany his father, pleaded to join him. Hamilcar, perhaps sensing an opportunity to instill a profound sense of purpose, led the boy to an altar dedicated to the gods. There, in a quiet ritual, he bade Hannibal place his hand upon the sacred offering and swear an oath. The promise extracted was a vow of eternal enmity towards Rome, a commitment that Hannibal would never be a friend to the Roman people. This was not presented as a dramatic theatrical declaration, but rather as a quiet, deeply personal commitment, a promise made in the solemn shadow of paternal influence, and before the watchful eyes of the divine. For a young mind, this act would have been profoundly impactful, solidifying the anti-Roman sentiment that permeated his family into a tangible personal obligation. It transformed an inherited grievance into a sworn duty. The historical significance of this oath cannot be overstated. Whether precisely accurate in its details or embellished over time, the story serves as a powerful metaphor for the unwavering focus that would define Hannibal's entire military career. It encapsulates the deep-seated resentment and strategic foresight of Hamilcar, subtly passing the torch of this grand ambition to his son. This quiet promise, made in the formative years of his childhood, became a guiding principle, a silent directive that would ultimately lead Hannibal to challenge the might of Rome in ways that few others dared to contemplate. It was a moment that set a course, not just for a boy, but for the trajectory of an empire. Following the solemn oath, young Hannibal's life took a significant turn with the family's relocation to Hispania. This was not merely a change of residence, but an immersion into a new frontier, a land where Hamilcar Barca was actively forging a new Carthaginian domain. The Iberian Peninsula, as it was then known, held immense strategic value for Carthage, a value Hamilcar keenly understood. Its mountains were rich in silver, a vital resource for funding military ventures and maintaining economic stability. Control over these mines provided the financial bedrock upon which Carthaginian power could be rebuilt. Beyond its mineral wealth, Hispania offered a vast pool of potential manpower. Its diverse indigenous tribes, many of whom were renowned warriors, could be recruited and integrated into Carthaginian armies, augmenting their strength and providing a formidable fighting force. In this rugged and often untamed land, Hannibal spent his childhood and adolescence. His upbringing was far removed from the more urbanized environment of Carthage itself. Instead, it was a life steeped in military realities. He would have been exposed daily to the routines of camp life, the discipline of soldiers, and the practicalities of campaigning. He learned to ride and hunt, skills essential for military leadership in that era. This militaristic environment was his school. He observed his father and his generals firsthand, witnessing their strategic decisions, their interactions with diverse local populations, and their methods of command. He learned the languages of the various Iberian tribes, a crucial skill for diplomacy and effective leadership within a multi-ethnic army. This immersion in a frontier setting, constantly engaged in expansion and consolidation of power, fostered in him a deep understanding of warfare, logistics, and the complexities of managing different peoples under Carthaginian authority. Hispania was not just a place where he grew up, it was where he was forged into the leader he would become, absorbing the practical lessons of empire building and military command from the very ground up. Within the vibrant and challenging landscape of Hispania, Hannibal's early years unfolded as a continuous military apprenticeship under the direct tutelage of his father, Hamilcar. This was not a formal classroom education, but rather an immersive practical schooling in the art of war. From a young age, while Hannibal was present at military encampments, observing the intricate machinery of an army in motion. He witnessed the daily routines, the training exercises, and the quiet preparations for campaigns. Hamilcar, a master strategist and tactician, provided a living textbook for his son. Hannibal would have watched his father meticulously plan movements, assess terrain, and deploy forces. He learned the critical importance of logistics, understanding how vital supplies of food, water, and equipment were to sustain an army far from home. He saw how Hamilcar managed diverse units, Carthaginian regulars, Iberian auxiliaries, Numidian cavalry, blending their strengths into a cohesive fighting force. These were years of quiet absorption. Hannibal was not merely a passive observer, he participated, albeit in increasingly responsible roles as he matured. He would have ridden alongside his father on reconnaissance missions, learning to read the landscape, identify strategic points, and anticipate enemy movements. He experienced the discipline required to maintain order within a large and often disparate army. He saw firsthand the consequences of both sound judgment and miscalculation in the field. The campaigns in Hispania offered a relentless series of practical lessons. Each skirmish, each siege, each diplomatic overture to a local tribe presented a new problem to be solved, a new set of variables to consider. Hannibal's mind, naturally keen and analytical, would have processed these experiences, filing away observations and internalizing principles of command. He learned not just what his father did, but why he did it, grasping the underlying strategic thought behind each maneuver. This close mentorship instilled in him a profound understanding of military science, equipping him with the practical knowledge and intuitive grasp of warfare that would define his later career. It was here, in the dust and heat of Hispania, that the foundations of his legendary generalship were quietly laid. The ceaseless campaigns in Hispania, which had been the crucible of Hannibal's early education, eventually claimed the life of his father. In the year 228 BCE, during a battle against the Oritani, a powerful Iberian tribe, Hamilcar Barca met his end. The exact circumstances remained somewhat clouded by the mists of history, but the outcome was clear. Carthage had lost its most formidable general, and Hannibal, still a young man, was left without his primary mentor. His father's death marked a significant turning point, both for the Carthaginian presence in Hispania and for Hannibal's personal trajectory. Following Hamilcar's passing, leadership of the Carthaginian forces in Hispania did not immediately fall to Hannibal. Instead, the command was assumed by Hasdrubal the Fair. Hasdrubal was not a blood relation in the direct male line, but he was Hamilcar's son-in-law, having married one of Hamilcar's daughters. He was a skilled diplomat and strategist in his own right, known for his ability to consolidate Carthaginian power through negotiation and alliance building, rather than solely through military conquest. This approach was a subtle but important shift from Hamilcar's more aggressive expansionist policies. Under Hasdrubal's command, Hannibal continued his military service. Though the nature of leadership had changed, the opportunity for learning remained. Hasdrubal's methods offered a different perspective on command. Where Hamilcar had emphasized direct confrontation and decisive victory, Hasdrubal demonstrated the power of diplomacy, the art of securing loyalty through treaties, and the strategic advantage of consolidating gains through peaceful means. Hannibal observed how Hasdrubal navigated the complex web of Iberian tribal politics, forging alliances that expanded Carthaginian influence without constant warfare. This period under Hasdrubal was crucial for Hannibal's development. It broadened his understanding of leadership beyond the battlefield. He learned the value of intelligence gathering, the importance of maintaining stable supply lines through political agreements, and the delicate balance required to govern a vast and diverse territory. While still active in military operations, likely commanding troops in various engagements, Hannibal was now exposed to a more nuanced form of imperial management. He continued to hone his practical skills in warfare, but he also absorbed the intricacies of political strategy, further enriching his already formidable military education. This quiet apprenticeship under Hasdrubal prepared him for the multifaceted challenges that lay ahead. Under Hasdrubal the Fair, the Carthaginian presence in Hispania underwent a significant transformation, shifting from an era primarily defined by military conquest to one characterized by diplomatic consolidation. Hasdrubal possessed a remarkable talent for negotiation and a keen understanding of the local Iberian tribes. He preferred to expand Carthaginian influence through treaties and alliances, offering protection and economic benefits in exchange for loyalty, rather than through the constant attrition of warfare. This approach proved highly effective, allowing Carthage to solidify its control over vast territories with less expenditure of blood and treasure. A key achievement of Hasdrubal's leadership was the founding of Carthago Nova, or New Carthage. Established around 227 BCE, this strategically located city on the southeastern coast of Hispania served as a new administrative and military hub for the Carthaginian Empire in the region. Its deep harbour provided an excellent naval base, while its proximity to rich silver mines ensured a steady flow of resources, further strengthening Carthage's economic and military capabilities. Carthago Nova quickly grew into a thriving metropolis, a testament to Hasdrubal's vision for a stable and prosperous Carthaginian dominion in Hispania. During this period of Carthaginian expansion and consolidation, Rome, ever watchful of potential rivals, began to express concerns. To address these anxieties and define spheres of influence, the Ebro Treaty was established in 226 BCE between Hasdrubal and the Roman Republic. This agreement stipulated that the Ebro River, a significant waterway in northeastern Hispania, would serve as the boundary. Carthage pledged not to expand its military operations north of the Ebro, while Rome agreed not to interfere with Carthaginian affairs to the south. The Ebro Treaty was intended to maintain a fragile peace and prevent direct conflict. However, its implications were far-reaching and ultimately contributed to future tensions. While it temporarily stabilized relations, it also formalized a division that implicitly acknowledged Carthage's growing power in Hispania, a development that Rome viewed with increasing apprehension. The treaty, seemingly a measure of peace, thus laid down a geographical line that would, in time, become a critical fault line in the burgeoning rivalry between these two great powers. The carefully constructed stability of Carthaginian Hispania under Hasdrubal the Fair was abruptly shattered in 221 BCE. While engaged in his diplomatic endeavours, Hasdrubal met an untimely end, falling victim to an assassin's blade. The details surrounding this event are somewhat obscured by the passage of time, but ancient accounts suggest he was killed by a Celtic chieftain in retribution for an earlier offence. His death left a void in the leadership of the Carthaginian forces in Hispania, a void that required immediate and decisive filling. Upon the news of Hasdrubal's demise, the Carthaginian army in Hispania did not hesitate. Their choice for the next commander was swift and unanimous: Hannibal Barca. This was not a sudden elevation based on family lineage alone, nor was it the result of a political maneuver back in Carthage. Rather, it was a natural and organic progression, a clear reflection of Hannibal's established reputation among the soldiers he had served alongside for years. By this point, Hannibal was in his late 20s, a seasoned veteran of numerous campaigns. He'd spent his entire adult life, and indeed much of his youth, immersed in the military environment of Hispania. Under both his father Hamilcar and his brother-in-law Hasdrubal, he had consistently demonstrated exceptional military prowess, tactical insight, and a profound understanding of leadership. He had led troops in battle, managed logistical challenges, and participated in both the strategic and diplomatic aspects of consolidating Carthaginian power. The soldiers knew him. They had witnessed his courage, his resilience, and his unwavering commitment to their cause. They had seen his ability to inspire loyalty and achieve victory. Thus, their election of Hannibal was an affirmation of his proven capabilities, a recognition that he was the most qualified individual to lead them forward. This popular acclamation by the army itself underscored his legitimacy and reinforced his authority from the very outset of his command. His rise was a testament to his innate and cultivated abilities, acknowledged by those who would follow him into the crucible of future conflicts. Upon assuming command, Hannibal immediately embarked on a systematic program to solidify Carthaginian dominion across Hispania. His initial focus was not on grand new conquests, but on ensuring the stability and loyalty of the territories already under Carthaginian influence, and then extending that influence over the remaining independent tribes that lay beyond direct control. This methodical approach reflected a clear understanding of the strategic imperatives at hand. The Iberian Peninsula was a patchwork of diverse peoples, some allied with Carthage, and others fiercely independent, and a few potentially swayed by Roman interests. Hannibal recognized that any significant future endeavor would require a secure and unified base of operations. He began by leading his forces into the territories of the Olcades, a powerful tribe situated to the west of Carthago Nova. Through a series of carefully planned campaigns, he subdued them, establishing Carthaginian authority and securing their resources. This initial success demonstrated his leadership to both his own troops and to the wider Iberian populace. Following the subjugation of the Olcades, Hannibal turned his attention to other tribes, such as the Vacae and the Carpetani. His strategy was consistent: employ a combination of military force when necessary, coupled with diplomatic engagement and the strategic placement of garrisons to ensure lasting control. He understood that military victories alone were insufficient. Long-term stability required integrating these peoples into the Carthaginian system, whether through alliances, tribute, or direct governance. A crucial aspect of this consolidation was the acquisition of resources and manpower. Hispania was rich in silver mines, a vital source of wealth for Carthage, and its various tribes provided a deep reservoir of potential recruits for the army. Hannibal meticulously organized the exploitation of these resources, ensuring a steady flow of funds and soldiers to sustain his growing military machine. His leadership during this period was characterized by thoroughness and foresight. He was not merely a general leading battles. He was an administrator, a strategist, and a diplomat, carefully weaving together the disparate threads of Iberian society into a cohesive fabric under Carthaginian control. Every action taken during these years was a deliberate step towards strengthening his position and preparing for the monumental challenges that lay ahead. With Carthaginian authority firmly re-established and extended in Hispania, Hannibal's gaze turned towards the city of Saguntum. This Iberian city, though located south of the Ebro River, and thus within the sphere generally understood as Carthaginian influence, had established an alliance with Rome. Its strategic position and its relationship with Rome made it a focal point of increasing diplomatic tension, a latent point of contention waiting to ignite the long-standing animosity between the two great powers. The Ebro Treaty, negotiated by Hasdrubal the Fair, had stipulated that Carthaginian forces would not cross the Ebro River with hostile intent. However, the treaty did not explicitly define the status of cities south of the Ebro that might choose to ally with Rome. This ambiguity became a critical vulnerability. Saguntum, feeling secure in its Roman alliance, began to assert itself against tribes allied with Carthage in its vicinity, precipitating local conflicts that provided Hannibal with a pretext for intervention. In 219 BCE, Hannibal initiated the siege of Saguntum. This was not a sudden, impulsive act, but a calculated move. He understood the profound implications of attacking a city under Roman protection. Messengers were dispatched to Rome, appealing for intervention, and the Roman Senate, after deliberation, he sent envoys to Carthage demanding that Hannibal cease his aggression. However, the Carthaginian government, swayed by the Barcid faction, and perhaps recognizing the inevitable clash, chose to support Hannibal's actions, interpreting the Ebro Treaty in their favour regarding Saguntum's location. The siege itself was protracted and brutal, lasting for 8 months. These Saguntines resisted fiercely, demonstrating remarkable resilience against the Carthaginian assault. Hannibal, personally leading the siege, was even wounded during the fighting. Despite Roman diplomatic pressure and the extended duration, Saguntum ultimately fell to Carthaginian forces. The city was plundered and its inhabitants enslaved. For Rome, this act was an undeniable casus belli, as a direct challenge to their authority and a violation of their perceived sphere of influence. The capture of Saguntum, therefore, was not merely a military victory for Hannibal. It was the deliberate and decisive spark that ignited the Second Punic War. With the fall of Saguntum and Rome's subsequent declaration of war, the stage was set for a conflict of immense proportions. It was at this juncture that Hannibal unveiled a strategy of astonishing audacity, one that defied conventional military wisdom of the time. Rather than engaging Rome in a protracted struggle for control of Hispania or Sicily, the traditional battlegrounds of the First Punic War, Hannibal conceived of a direct invasion of the Italian peninsula itself. The rationale behind this bold move was multi-layered and deeply insightful. Hannibal understood that Carthage could not hope to match Rome's naval superiority in the long term. A seaborne invasion of Italy was fraught with peril, vulnerable to interdiction by the formidable Roman fleet. By choosing an overland route, Hannibal aimed to bypass this critical Roman advantage entirely, transforming a maritime weakness into a strategic irrelevance for the initial phase of his campaign. Furthermore, Hannibal recognized that Rome's strength lay not only in its legions, but also in its extensive network of alliances with various Italian cities and peoples. These allies provided Rome with a vast reservoir of manpower and resources, forming the backbone of its military might. Hannibal's plan was to take the war directly to the heart of Roman territory, to demonstrate Rome's vulnerability, and thereby to sever these crucial alliances. He believed that by inflicting decisive defeats on Roman armies on their own soil, he could sow disaffection among Rome's allies, encouraging them to defect and join his cause. This would not only weaken Rome, but also bolster his own forces with local recruits. Such a strategy also carried the inherent advantage of surprise. Roman strategists, anticipating a war fought on the periphery of their empire, would be forced to react to an entirely unforeseen threat at their very doorstep. The psychological impact of an enemy army marching through Italy, devastating the countryside and challenging Roman authority directly, was a central component of Hannibal's design. It was a plan that required immense logistical planning, unwavering determination, and a profound understanding of both Roman strengths and weaknesses. Hannibal's grand strategy was not merely about winning battles, it was about dismantling the very foundation of Roman power and reshaping the political landscape of the Mediterranean. The decision to invade Italy directly, however audacious, was only the first step. The execution of such a plan demanded an extraordinary level of preparation, a quiet, almost methodical assembly of resources and manpower. Hannibal understood that the success of his venture hinged on meticulous planning and the ability to sustain a large, diverse army through unfamiliar and often hostile landscapes. His army, gathered from various corners of the Carthaginian sphere of influence, was a testament to his logistical acumen. It comprised a formidable array of fighting men, disciplined Iberian infantry, renowned for their resilience, swift Numidian cavalry, whose harassing tactics would prove invaluable, and perhaps most strikingly, a contingent of war elephants, creatures of immense power and psychological impact. Each component had its specific role, and their integration into a cohesive fighting force required careful organization. The logistical challenges of supplying such an expedition were immense. Food, fodder for the animals, weaponry and siege equipment all had to be amassed and transported. Hannibal established a sophisticated system of depots and supply lines, ensuring that his army, once on the move, would not be crippled by want. This involved not only the procurement of vast quantities of provisions, but also the meticulous arrangement for their movement across vast distances, often through territories that might prove hostile or difficult to traverse. Beyond the material preparations, there was the less tangible, yet equally crucial aspect of morale. Hannibal instilled in his diverse troops a shared sense of purpose and loyalty. He spent considerable time addressing his officers and men, explaining the objectives of the campaign, and fostering a collective determination. This quiet leadership, combined with the rigorous training and disciplined organization, forged a disparate collection of warriors into a unified instrument of war. The entire undertaking was a testament to Hannibal's foresight and his capacity for grand-scale organization, while transforming a daring concept into a tangible, albeit monumental endeavor. With preparations complete, the immense Carthaginian army began its westward movement from Hispania, a slow, deliberate advance towards the first major geographical barrier, the Pyrenees Mountains. This was not a swift, unopposed march, but a gradual pushing forward, a test of the army's cohesion and endurance even before the legendary Alps. The Pyrenees, while not possessing the same formidable reputation as the Alps, presented their own unique set of challenges. The terrain was rugged and uneven, with narrow passes and steep ascents. Moving hundreds of thousands of men, along with cavalry, baggage trains, and the imposing war elephants through such an environment was an organizational feat in itself. The sheer volume of the army stretched for miles. A slow-moving river of humanity and beasts winding through the foothills and mountain paths. As the army traversed these passes, they encountered various local Celtic tribes. These tribes, often fiercely independent and wary of large foreign forces passing through their lands, were not always amenable to Hannibal's presence. Skirmishes inevitably broke out. These were not decisive battles, but rather a series of harassing attacks and defensive engagements. The tribesmen, utilizing their knowledge of the local terrain, would launch ambushes, seeking to disrupt the Carthaginian advance and plunder their supplies. These encounters, though relatively minor in the grand scheme of the campaign, extracted a toll. Supplies were sometimes lost, and more significantly, lives were forfeited. These initial losses, and sustained before the army had even reached the heart of Gaul, served as a stark reminder of the arduous journey ahead. Hannibal, ever pragmatic, understood the need to consolidate his forces and manage his resources. He reportedly left a significant portion of his Iberian troops to garrison the newly secured territories and to protect his lines of communication, effectively reducing the size of his expeditionary force as he prepared to push further north. This decision, made with quiet resolve, underscored the immense scale of the undertaking and the ongoing adjustments required to maintain momentum. Having navigated the Pyrenees, Hannibal's army now entered the vast expanse of southern Gaul. This region, a patchwork of diverse Celtic tribes, presented a new set of strategic considerations. Unlike the more isolated mountain tribes, many Gallic communities were larger, more organised, and possessed significant military capabilities. Hannibal understood that a direct, aggressive confrontation with every tribe would be unsustainable, consuming precious time and resources before he even reached the Alps. His approach through Gaul was therefore characterised by a blend of astute diplomacy and, when necessary, decisive military action. Hannibal dispatched envoys ahead of his main force, seeking to secure agreements for safe passage and, crucially, for the provision of supplies. He presented himself not as a conqueror of Gaul, but as a liberator, an enemy of Rome, seeking to pass through their lands on his way to Italy. For some tribes, particularly those with existing grievances against Roman expansion or influence, this message resonated. They saw an opportunity to align with a powerful force that might challenge the growing dominance of the nascent Roman Republic. These diplomatic overtures often bore fruit, allowing segments of the Carthaginian army to move through tribal territories with relative ease, purchasing provisions and even gaining additional recruits. However, not all Gallic tribes were swayed by persuasion or shared an anti-Roman sentiment. Some remained fiercely independent, viewing any large foreign army as a threat to their sovereignty. These tribes resisted Hannibal's passage, leading to intermittent skirmishes and engagements. One notable confrontation occurred near the Rhone River, where a significant Gallic force had gathered, intending to block Hannibal's crossing. Here, his adaptive leadership was evident. Instead of frontal assault, he reportedly employed a clever flanking maneuver, sending a detachment upstream to cross the river stealthily and attack the Gauls from the rear. This unexpected tactic caused confusion and disarray among the opposing forces, allowing the main Carthaginian army to construct rafts and successfully ford the wide river. This episode highlighted Hannibal's capacity to assess a situation, devise an unconventional solution, and execute it effectively, minimizing losses while maintaining his strategic momentum. His journey through Gaul was a continuous demonstration of this blend of negotiation and calculated force, a measured advance across a complex political and geographical landscape. The journey through Gaul brought Hannibal's army to the formidable barrier of the Rhone River. This broad, swift-flowing waterway presented a significant logistical challenge, far greater than any encountered thus far. It was not merely a matter of getting thousands of soldiers across, but also their horses, vast quantities of equipment, and perhaps most uniquely, their complement of war elephants. The successful crossing of the Rhone would serve as a powerful testament to Hannibal's organizational genius and the resilience of his diverse force. To facilitate the passage of his infantry and cavalry, Hannibal's engineers swiftly set about constructing a series of rafts and boats, some reportedly acquired from local Gallic tribes. The sheer scale of this operation was immense, requiring coordinated effort to fell trees, lash timbers together, and manage the currents of the river. As the soldiers began to cross, the more complex problem of the elephants remained. These immense animals were not easily transported, and their natural aversion to water, particularly deep flowing rivers, posed a unique obstacle. Hannibal devised an ingenious method. Large, sturdy rafts were constructed, covered with earth and disguised to appear as extensions of the riverbank. These platforms were then secured to the shore. The elephants, guided by their mahouts, were coaxed onto these seemingly stable earthen surfaces. Once a group of elephants was aboard, the rafts were carefully detached from the bank. Some accounts suggest that smaller boats or additional rafts were then used to tow these massive platforms across the river, while others describe the elephants being guided across on their own, perhaps encouraged by the illusion of solid ground. A particularly telling detail of this crossing involves the elephants' reactions. As the rafts moved into the deeper, faster currents, some of the elephants reportedly became disoriented or panicked. The swift motion of the water underneath them, combined with the instability of the rafts, caused distress. Some animals reportedly plunged into the river, but even then, their inherent buoyancy and the guidance of their handlers allowed many to swim to the opposite bank. This intricate operation, carried out under the watchful eyes of the entire army and with the constant threat of nearby Roman forces, underscored Hannibal's remarkable ability to anticipate and overcome logistical nightmares. The successful transportation of his entire army, including the elephants, across the formidable Rhone was not merely a physical feat, but a profound demonstration of his leadership, foresight, and the innovative spirit that defined his campaign. It was an obstacle transformed into a triumph, a quiet affirmation of his unwavering resolve to reach Italy. Having successfully navigated the Rhone, Hannibal's army now turned eastward, towards the formidable and imposing presence of the Alps. It was late autumn, a time when the high mountain passes would soon become impassable, yet the strategic imperative to reach Italy before winter fully set in and before Roman defences could solidify was paramount. This crossing would become the most iconic and grueling segment of his entire march. The conditions encountered in the Alps were brutal. As the army ascended, the familiar landscapes of Gaul gave way to increasingly rugged terrain. The air grew thin and cold. Soon, the first snows began to fall, then heavier accumulations covering the narrow winding paths in a treacherous blanket of white. Ice formed on the already precarious ledges, making every step a potential disaster for men, horses, and elephants alike. The cold was penetrating, a constant companion that sapped strength and resolve. The journey was not merely a battle against nature. The mountain tribes, fierce and protective of their territories, launched frequent ambushes. From hidden positions above, they would hurl rocks and spears down upon the marching columns, particularly targeting the supply train and the more vulnerable sections of the army. These attacks, often occurring in difficult terrain, forced Hannibal to devise clever tactics, sometimes using his light infantry to clear the heights ahead, sometimes feigning a retreat to draw the attackers into a more open engagement. The suffering endured by the army during this period was immense. Many men, unaccustomed to such extreme cold and high altitudes, succumbed to exposure, exhaustion, or accidents on the slippery paths. Horses and pack animals, essential for carrying provisions and equipment, perished in significant numbers, falling from cliffs or freezing in the relentless snow. The elephants, though remarkably resilient, also faced extreme challenges, their large bodies struggling to maintain balance on the narrow icy tracks. One particularly harrowing incident involved a section of the path that had collapsed, requiring days of arduous labour to clear and widen a passage for the elephants, a testament to the engineering and sheer willpower of the Carthaginian sappers. Through all of this, Hannibal himself remained a constant presence, moving among his troops, offering encouragement, and personally overseeing the most difficult sections of the ascent and descent. His presence was a source of unwavering resolve. The Alpine crossing was not merely a military manoeuvre, it was an epic test of endurance, a demonstration of human and animal suffering on a grand scale, and ultimately a powerful testament to the indomitable will of one man to lead his army against seemingly insurmountable odds. Emerging from the eastern slopes of the Alps, the army was a shadow of its former self, but it had achieved the impossible. As the weary columns finally began their descent from the snow-capped peaks, the landscape gradually transformed. The harsh, unforgiving rock and ice gave way to more gentle slopes, and then to the rolling foothills of Cisalpine Gaul, and at last the fertile plains of northern Italy. The sight of this new land, the long-sought destination, must have brought a profound, if exhausted, sense of relief to the surviving soldiers. However, this arrival was far from a triumphant entry. The cost of the Alpine crossing had been devastating. Hannibal's army, which had numbered perhaps 90,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry when it departed Hispania, had been drastically reduced. Estimates vary, but it's generally accepted that he had lost a substantial portion of his forces. When he presented his army on the plains below, it is believed he commanded no more than 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. The formidable war elephants, a psychological weapon of immense power, had also suffered greatly. Of the perhaps 37 elephants that began the journey, only a handful, perhaps a mere 7, were thought to have survived the ordeal, their massive bodies scarred by the cold and the treacherous terrain. Those who remained were not in prime condition. The men were gaunt, their clothing ragged, their bodies worn from constant exposure to extreme cold, hunger, and relentless marching. Many bore the scars of skirmishes with mountain tribes, or the lingering effects of frostbite and illness. The horses too were emaciated and weary, their strength depleted by the arduous climb and descent. This was not the vibrant, fully equipped force that had marched from New Carthage. Hannibal stood at the head of a diminished yet hardened host. Their achievement was undeniable. They had accomplished a feat that Rome had deemed impossible, by crossing the formidable barrier of the Alps in late autumn. This was a hard-won, costly achievement, purchased with immense suffering and significant attrition. His strategic genius had brought them to Italy, but the immediate challenge was now to replenish his ranks, restore the health and morale of his surviving troops, and prepare them for the inevitable confrontation with the full might of the Roman Republic. The battle readiness of this weary army would soon be tested on the plains below. Upon his arrival in the Po Valley, Hannibal immediately sought to replenish his weary forces and secure local alliances. The Celtic tribes of Cisalpine Gaul, long resentful of Roman domination, offered a fertile ground for recruitment. While his army rested and grew, the Roman response was swift. Publius Cornelius Scipio, the consul who had attempted to intercept Hannibal in Gaul, had returned to Italy by sea and was now positioned to confront the Carthaginian invader. The first significant engagement occurred near the Ticinus River in late 218 BCE. This was primarily a cavalry skirmish. Scipio, leading his Roman and allied cavalry, advanced to reconnoitre Hannibal's positions. Hannibal, with his superior Numidian light cavalry, met them. The Punic cavalry, employing their customary tactics of feigned retreats and flanking manoeuvres, quickly overwhelmed the Roman horsemen. Scipio himself was wounded in the fray and narrowly escaped capture, reportedly saved by his own son, a young man who would later become known as Scipio Africanus. This skirmish, though not a large-scale battle, was a significant psychological victory for Hannibal. It established the superiority of his cavalry and boosted the morale of his troops and his newly acquired Gallic allies, while delivering a clear message to the Romans. Hannibal was a formidable opponent. Soon after, a larger confrontation unfolded on the banks of the Trebia River in December of the same year. Scipio, still recovering, had been reinforced by the army of the other consul, Tiberius Sempronius Longus. The combined Roman force was numerically superior to Hannibal's. However, Hannibal observed the impetuous nature of Sempronius and meticulously planned an ambush. He sent his brother, Mago, with a detachment of cavalry and light infantry to conceal themselves in a deep, overgrown ravine that bisected the plain. On a cold, wintry morning, Hannibal provoked the Romans with light cavalry skirmishes, drawing them across the icy waters of the Trebia. The Roman legions, cold and hungry, were then met by Hannibal's main line. As the battle raged, Mago's hidden force emerged from the ravine, striking the Roman rear. This sudden attack, combined with Hannibal's disciplined main line and effective use of his cavalry on the flanks, shattered the Roman formation. Despite their numerical advantage, the Romans suffered a catastrophic defeat. Thousands were killed or captured, marking a devastating start to the war for Rome, and a resounding confirmation of Hannibal's tactical genius. Following the victories at Ticinus and Trebia, Hannibal spent the winter months of 218 to 217 BCE consolidating his position in Cisalpine Gaul, further strengthening his army with Gallic recruits. As spring approached, the Roman consuls Gnaeus Servilius Geminus and Gaius Flaminius prepared to block his advance into central Italy. Flaminius, known for his aggressive temperament, positioned his army at Arretium, while Servilius was stationed further east. Hannibal, seeking to bypass these Roman forces and draw Flaminius into battle on his own terms, chose a path that the Romans considered impassable, the vast, notoriously marshy lowlands of the Arno River. This decision underscored Hannibal's willingness to take extreme risks and subject his army to immense suffering for strategic advantage. The march through the Arno marshes in the spring of 217 BCE was an ordeal comparable to, and in some ways even more harrowing than, the crossing of the Alps. Heavy spring rains had swollen the Arno, turning the already boggy terrain into a vast shallow lake. For 4 days and 3 nights, Hannibal's army slogged through waist-deep, sometimes chest-deep, icy water and mud. The conditions were brutal. Soldiers, horses, and the few remaining elephants had no dry ground to rest upon. Sleep was snatched standing, or perched precariously on their equipment. The constant exposure to cold water, the lack of dry food, and the pervasive dampness led to widespread illness. Many men succumbed to disease, while numerous animals perished, their carcasses sinking into the mire. The stench was oppressive, and the air thick with insects. During this grueling passage, Hannibal himself endured profound personal hardship. He rode his last remaining elephant named Surus, a beast renowned for its strength, which elevated him above the deepest waters. However, and the relentless exposure and the severe conditions took a toll. An infection, likely ophthalmia, afflicted one of his eyes. With no opportunity for proper medical care in the midst of the marsh, the infection worsened rapidly. Despite the intense pain and the debilitating nature of the ailment, Hannibal continued to command, guiding his army with unwavering resolve. Tragically, the infection ultimately claimed his sight in that eye, leaving him permanently disfigured. The loss of his eye, endured silently amidst the suffering of his troops, further cemented his bond with his men and highlighted his extraordinary personal resilience. Despite the severe losses incurred, Hannibal successfully emerged from the marshes into Etruria, having outmaneuvered the Roman consuls and positioned himself to strike deeper into Italy. This march, a testament to his iron will and the loyalty of his army, once again demonstrated his capacity for audacious strategic thinking and his willingness to pay any personal cost for victory. Having successfully navigated the treacherous Arno marshes, Hannibal's army emerged into Etruria, positioned to advance further south. His immediate objective was to provoke the Roman consul Gaius Flaminius, whose army was stationed near Arretium. Flaminius was known for his impetuous nature, a trait Hannibal sought to exploit. Hannibal deliberately marched his army through the fertile Roman countryside, allowing his troops to forage and devastate the land, knowing that such actions would incense the consul and compel him to a rash pursuit. Flaminius, indeed, proved predictable. Ignoring the advice of his officers and disregarding omens, yet he ordered his army to pursue Hannibal. The Carthaginian commander, with his keen understanding of terrain, had already identified an ideal location for an ambush. This site was a narrow defile along the northern shore of Lake Trasimene, a large body of water in central Italy. The chosen ground possessed specific features that Hannibal intended to turn into a deadly trap. To the north, steep wooded hills rose abruptly from the lake. To the south, the lake itself formed an impassable barrier. A long, narrow road ran between the hills and the lake. At the eastern end of this defile, the terrain opened slightly, allowing a Roman army to enter, while the western end narrowed considerably. Under the cover of darkness, Hannibal meticulously deployed his forces. His light infantry and cavalry were concealed in the hills along the northern flank of the road, stretching for miles. His heavy infantry, positioned at the western, narrower end of the defile, was tasked with blocking the Roman escape route. At the eastern entrance, a small contingent of Carthaginian forces was strategically placed to draw the Romans deeper into the trap. On the morning of June 21st, 217 BCE, a thick early morning mist rose from Lake Trasimene, obscuring visibility. Flaminius, eager to engage, marched his army directly into the defile without sending out scouts. The Roman legions, strung out in a long column, entered the pass, their right flank unprotected by the lake and their left by the unseen hills. As the entire Roman column entered the ambush zone, Hannibal gave the signal. The concealed Carthaginian forces descended from the hills, attacking the unsuspecting Roman flank and rear simultaneously. The small Carthaginian contingent at the front blocked the Roman advance, while the heavy infantry at the rear sealed off any retreat. Trapped between the lake, the hills, and the Carthaginian forces, the Roman army was utterly surrounded and unable to form battle lines. The battle became a chaotic massacre. The dense mist added to the confusion and terror, preventing the Romans from understanding the extent of their predicament or coordinating any effective defence. Many Roman soldiers, pressed against the lake, drowned in their attempts to escape. Consul Flaminius himself was killed early in the engagement. The devastation was complete. Approximately 15,000 Roman soldiers were killed and another 10,000 captured. Hannibal's forces suffered minimal casualties. The Battle of Lake Trasimene represented a catastrophic defeat for Rome, demonstrating Hannibal's unparalleled mastery of tactical ambush and his profound ability to exploit both terrain and enemy psychology. The catastrophic defeat at Lake Trasimene plunged Rome into a state of profound shock and despair. The immediate aftermath saw widespread panic, but also a stark recognition of the extraordinary threat posed by Hannibal. In this moment of extreme crisis, the Roman Senate took the extraordinary measure of appointing Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus as dictator. This was a temporary supreme command, granted only in dire emergencies, and it vested him with absolute authority to address the Carthaginian menace. Now, Fabius Maximus was a man of considerable experience and a deeply conservative temperament. He understood that the conventional Roman military strategy, which favoured direct confrontation and pitched battles, had repeatedly played into Hannibal's hands. 3 major Roman armies had been annihilated in quick succession at the Ticinus, Trebia and Trasimene. A radical shift in approach was clearly necessary. Fabius introduced what would become known as the Fabian strategy. This was a deliberate policy of attrition and harassment, meticulously designed to avoid direct engagement with Hannibal's main army. Instead of seeking battle, Fabius aimed to shadow Hannibal's movements, consistently maintaining a position on the high ground just out of reach. His legions would follow the Carthaginian army, observing their every move but never committing to a full-scale confrontation. The core tenets of this strategy involved several key actions. Roman forces would cut off Hannibal's foraging parties, deny him access to supplies, and generally make his presence in Italy as difficult and unprofitable as possible. Fabius systematically evacuated towns and villages in Hannibal's path, removing potential resources and preventing the Carthaginian army from resupplying itself from the local populace. He also focused on strengthening Roman fortifications and protecting allied cities, ensuring that Hannibal could not easily secure a permanent base or incite widespread defection. This cautious approach, however, proved deeply unpopular with many Romans. It ran counter to the Roman martial spirit, which valued swift, decisive victories and direct engagement, and Fabius was derisively nicknamed Cunctator, or the Delayer, by those who felt his strategy was cowardly and ineffective. They yearned for a glorious battle that would expel Hannibal from Italy. The continuous devastation of Italian lands by Hannibal's army, unchecked by a direct Roman response, further fueled public discontent. Despite the criticism, Fabius remained steadfast in his conviction. He understood that time was on Rome's side. Hannibal was far from home, with limited resources and no reliable supply lines or reinforcements from Carthage. By denying him a decisive victory and constantly eroding his strength through minor skirmishes and logistical challenges, Fabius believed he could eventually wear down the Carthaginian invasion without risking another devastating defeat. His strategy, though unpopular, was a rational response to an unprecedented military genius, prioritizing the preservation of Roman strength over immediate but potentially ruinous glory. With the Fabian strategy denying him a pitched battle, Hannibal shifted his focus to a deliberate campaign of attrition and psychological warfare across the Italian peninsula. His army moved through the rich agricultural lands, systematically plundering and destroying crops, livestock and farms. This was not random destruction born of malice, but a highly calculated military maneuver. Hannibal understood that Rome's strength lay not only in its legions, but also in its vast network of allies, bound to it by treaties and shared interests. By devastating the countryside, he aimed to achieve several strategic objectives. Firstly, he sought to provision his own army, which was far from its Carthaginian supply lines. The rich bounty of Italy sustained his forces. Secondly, and more crucially, he intended to demonstrate Rome's inability to protect its own people and its allies. As Hannibal's army marched through regions, farms were burned, fields laid waste, and towns often sacked. Yet, a specific pattern emerged. Often, towns that had pledged allegiance to Rome were ravaged, while those that Hannibal hoped to sway to his side were spared, or at least treated with less severity. This selective destruction was a powerful, if brutal, form of propaganda. It sent a clear message to Rome's allies: your loyalty to Rome brings only ruin, and Rome is powerless to prevent it. The psychological impact on the Roman populace and its allies was profound. Seeing their lands ravaged and their livelihoods destroyed, while Roman legions under Fabius seemed to do little more than observe from a distance, fostered deep resentment and doubt. The strategy was designed to sow discord, to break the bonds of loyalty that held the Roman Confederation together, and to force Rome to abandon its Fabian tactics for a more direct and potentially disastrous confrontation. Hannibal aimed to isolate Rome, to peel away its allies one by one, and to cripple its economic base. He sought to create an internal crisis within the Roman state, forcing them to choose between protecting their allies and engaging his formidable army on his terms. This relentless ravaging of Italy was a patient, cruel, and highly effective form of strategic warfare, designed to undermine the very foundations of Roman power without the necessity of another large-scale battle. The year 216 BCE brought Hannibal to Cannae, a small village on the Aufidus River, where he would face the largest army Rome had ever assembled. Approximately 86,000 Roman and allied troops stood ready, a force nearly double the size of Hannibal's own, numbering around 50,000. The Roman consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, aimed to overwhelm the Carthaginians with sheer numerical superiority. Deploying their heavy infantry in a deep, dense formation, designed to punch through the Carthaginian centre. Hannibal, however, possessed a profound understanding of military psychology and the strengths and weaknesses of his diverse forces. He arrayed his less reliable Gallic and Iberian infantry in a crescent formation, bulging forward in the centre, while positioning his veteran African infantry on the flanks, held back and concealed. His formidable cavalry, under the command of Hannibal, was divided and placed on the wings. As the Roman legions advanced, pushing into the seemingly weaker Carthaginian centre, Hannibal's crescent formation slowly gave ground, drawing the Romans deeper into the trap. The Roman infantry, confident in their numerical advantage, pressed forward, their formation becoming increasingly compressed and disorganised in their pursuit. It was at this critical moment that Hannibal's tactical brilliance became fully manifest. His African infantry, which had remained steadfast on the flanks, swung inward, attacking the Roman legions from the sides. Simultaneously, Hannibal's cavalry, having routed their Roman counterparts, they returned to envelop the Roman army from the rear. The Roman legions, now tightly packed, surrounded on all sides and unable to manoeuvre, were caught in a catastrophic double envelopment. What began as an orderly advance devolved into a horrific slaughter. The Carthaginian forces systematically cut down the trapped Romans, creating a scene of unprecedented carnage. The Battle of Cannae resulted in the near-total annihilation of the Roman army, a staggering loss of life, estimated to be between 50,000 and 70,000 soldiers. It stands as a testament to Hannibal's unparalleled tactical genius, a masterclass in battlefield command that remains studied by military strategians to this day. The news of Cannae reached Rome as a profound shock, a devastating blow that brought the city to the brink of despair. Yet, with an estimated 80,000 Roman citizens and allies lost, the scale of the catastrophe was almost unimaginable. Nearly a fifth of all Roman males over 17 years of age were gone. The Senate, the very heart of the Republic, found itself depleted, with many of its members having fallen on the battlefield. Panic rippled through the populace as the spectre of Hannibal at the gate seemed more real than ever before. Yet despite this unprecedented calamity, Rome did not yield. Against all expectations, there was no talk of surrender, no desperate plea for peace. Instead, a deep, unwavering resolve emerged from the ashes of defeat. The Roman spirit, forged through centuries of conflict and hardship, proved remarkably resilient. Measures were immediately taken to stabilize the city and rebuild its forces. Funerals for the fallen were postponed to avoid further demoralization. Religious rites were performed to appease the gods and restore confidence. The Senate, though diminished, met continuously, demonstrating a calm and decisive leadership. Resources were mobilized with an intensity born of desperation. The age limits for military service were lowered, and even slaves were offered freedom in exchange for service in the legions. New legions were raised, equipped, and trained with remarkable speed. The entire Italian peninsula, though shaken by the Carthaginian presence, was called upon to contribute. Rome's determination was not simply a matter of military rebuilding, it was a profound psychological stand. They understood that to show weakness now would be to invite complete dissolution. Their response to Cannae was not one of despair, but of defiant endurance. This unexpected resilience, this steadfast refusal to break, would ultimately prove to be one of Rome's greatest strengths in the long, arduous struggle against Hannibal. It marked a turning point, not in the fortunes of battle, but in the unwavering spirit of the Republic. Following the monumental victory at Cannae, the nature of the war in Italy began to subtly but fundamentally shift. Hannibal, despite his tactical brilliance on the open field, found himself facing a new and formidable challenge: the fortified cities of Rome and its steadfast allies. His army, while highly effective in pitched battles, lacked the specialized siege equipment necessary to breach the formidable walls of major urban centers. Ballistae, onagers, and other heavy siege engines were not part of his mobile campaigning force. This deficiency meant that the strategic objective of dismantling the Roman Confederation, which relied on key cities abandoning Rome, became increasingly difficult. While some cities, particularly in southern Italy, did defect to Carthage after Cannae, many remained loyal, their defences proving impenetrable to Hannibal's forces. He could devastate the countryside, but he could not force the gates of Rome, nor of many other vital strongholds. Rome, having learned bitter lessons from its earlier disastrous encounters, consciously reverted to the cautious and attritional tactics championed by Fabius Maximus. They avoided direct confrontation, refusing to offer Hannibal the pitched battle he so desired and excelled at. Instead, Roman forces, now operating in multiple smaller commands, focused on harassment, disrupting Carthaginian foraging parties, ambushing isolated detachments, and reinforcing loyal cities. This strategic patience slowly began to wear down Hannibal's strength. His army, constantly on the move, was a finite resource. Each minor skirmish, each failed attempt to take a city, resulted in losses that could not easily be replaced. Reinforcements from Carthage were infrequent and often insufficient. The prolonged occupation of Italy also meant a constant drain on his supplies and manpower, as his soldiers endured years of campaigning far from home. The war transformed into a grueling contest of endurance, a slow chipping away at Carthaginian resources and morale. Roman commanders, while not seeking glory in grand battles, steadily reclaimed territory and reasserted Roman authority. This war of attrition, though less dramatic than Hannibal's early victories, gradually began to tip the scales, slowly eroding the Carthaginian advantage and revealing the deep reserves of Roman resilience. The aftermath of Cannae saw a significant shift in allegiances across Italy. Several cities and tribal groups, particularly in the south, reconsidered their loyalty to Rome. The most prominent defection was that of Capua, a city of considerable size and influence in Campania, which chose to align itself with Hannibal. Other cities in Samnium, Lucania, and Bruttium also opened their gates to the Carthaginian general, drawn by the promise of freedom from Roman dominance and the apparent invincibility of Hannibal's army. These new alliances, while outwardly signifying a weakening of Rome's confederation, presented Hannibal with a new set of complex challenges. He became responsible for the defense of these allies, stretching his already limited forces over a broader geographical area, protecting these cities from Roman retaliation, provisioning them, and integrating their sometimes unreliable militias into his professional army required significant diplomatic skill and military presence. Many of these allies, while eager to throw off the Roman yoke, were less enthusiastic about enduring the hardships of a prolonged war or providing substantial, reliable military contributions to Hannibal's main force. Their primary motivation was often local autonomy and the removal of Roman oversight, rather than a deep ideological commitment to Carthage. Crucially, Hannibal's strategic position in Italy was always hampered by the inconsistent and often insufficient support from Carthage itself, and despite his extraordinary successes, the Carthaginian Senate remained divided. A powerful faction, often led by Hanno the Great, was wary of committing vast resources to Hannibal's distant Italian campaign, preferring to focus on securing Carthaginian interests in Hispania or even North Africa. The cost of sending large armies and regular supplies across the sea was immense, and the naval superiority of Rome made such ventures perilous. Consequently, the reinforcements Hannibal received were sporadic and often fell short of what was needed to decisively press his advantage against Rome's vast manpower reserves. His brother Mago eventually brought some troops, and later Hasdrubal attempted a crossing of the Alps, but these were isolated efforts rather than a sustained flow of support. This reluctance from his home city meant that Hannibal's army, though formidable, slowly dwindled in strength, unable to fully capitalize on the chaos he had sown in Italy. He was left to operate largely independently, a brilliant general with an army that, while unmatched in quality, was continually challenged by the sheer scale of the Roman response and the limitations of his distant logistical support, while Hannibal continued to wage a relentless, yet increasingly challenging campaign in Italy. Another vital theatre of the Second Punic War was unfolding in Hispania. This peninsula, rich in resources and a crucial source of Carthaginian manpower, became the stage for a series of pivotal Roman campaigns. For years, the Scipio family had battled Carthaginian forces there, suffering both triumphs and devastating losses. However, the tide began to turn with the arrival of a remarkable young commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio, later to be known as Africanus, was a figure of rare talent. Despite his youth, he possessed a strategic vision and charismatic leadership that mirrored in many ways Hannibal's own. In 210 BC, after the deaths of his father and uncle in Hispania, Scipio, still in his mid-20s, volunteered to take command. His appointment was unconventional, but the desperation of the times called for extraordinary measures. Scipio immediately understood the strategic importance of Hispania. It was not merely a distant front. It was the wellspring from which Carthage drew much of its strength. It provided silver to fund the war, mercenaries to fill the ranks, and crucially, these served as the primary land route for any potential reinforcements attempting to reach Hannibal in Italy. By securing Hispania, Rome could effectively sever these vital arteries, isolating Hannibal and slowly starving his Italian campaign of critical resources. Scipio's campaigns in Hispania were characterized by bold maneuvers and innovative tactics. His surprise capture of New Carthage, the main Carthaginian basin treasury, in 209 BC, was a masterstroke that delivered a tremendous psychological and material blow. He then systematically engaged and defeated the various Carthaginian armies commanded by Hannibal's brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, and other Carthaginian generals. These victories were not easily won, but Scipio's tactical brilliance and ability to inspire his troops gradually dismantled Carthaginian power in the region. The methodical Roman advance in Hispania was a slow, deliberate strangulation of Carthage's ability to sustain its war effort, a critical counterpoint to Hannibal's audacious but ultimately unsupported endeavours in Italy. As Scipio systematically dismantled Carthaginian power in Hispania, Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal Barca, found himself in an increasingly untenable position. Recognizing the dwindling prospects in the Iberian Peninsula and the desperate need to reinforce his isolated brother in Italy, Hasdrubal made a momentous decision. He would attempt to replicate Hannibal's audacious feat, a march overland from Hispania, across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and over the formidable Alps, with the ultimate goal of joining forces with Hannibal. This undertaking was immense, and fraught with the same perils that had decimated Hannibal's army years earlier. Hasdrubal began his journey in 208 BC, gathering an army that, while formidable, was perhaps less seasoned than the force Hannibal had led. His route through Gaul was somewhat less contentious, as Roman influence had waned in certain areas since Hannibal's passage. Yet, the logistical challenges remained immense, requiring careful negotiation with Gallic tribes for passage and supplies, or, at times, forceful persuasion. The most daunting obstacle, however, remained the Alps. Hasdrubal's crossing, though not as detailed in historical accounts as Hannibal's, was undoubtedly a grueling ordeal. He faced the same unforgiving terrain, the same treacherous passes, the same bitter cold, and the same constant threat from hostile mountain tribes. While he may have benefited from some knowledge gleaned from Hannibal's earlier passage, the mountains offered no easy path. His army, too, suffered significant losses to the elements and the arduous physical demands. Despite these immense difficulties, Hasdrubal succeeded in bringing a substantial portion of his army, along with a number of elephants, through the Alpine passes and into Cisalpine Gaul in 207 BC. This was a remarkable achievement in its own right, a testament to the perseverance of the Barca family and their military acumen. His arrival in northern Italy presented Rome with a renewed and grave threat. For the first time since Hannibal's initial invasion, a second large Carthaginian army was now on Italian soil, poised to potentially link with Hannibal and reignite the war with devastating force. Earlier, the strategic stakes had never been higher for the Roman Republic. Hasdrubal Barca's arrival in northern Italy immediately created a critical juncture for Rome. The Roman strategy had long been to contain Hannibal, preventing him from gaining decisive ground or receiving reinforcements. Now, with a second Carthaginian army having successfully traversed the Alps, this containment was severely threatened. The prospect of Hannibal and Hasdrubal uniting their forces was a nightmare scenario for Rome, potentially leading to a renewed and overwhelming assault on the city itself. The Roman commanders, particularly the consuls Marcus Livius Salinator and Gaius Claudius Nero, understood the urgency of the situation. Nero, who had been shadowing Hannibal in the south, made a daring and unprecedented decision. He detached a significant portion of his army, leaving just enough to deceive Hannibal into believing he was still present, and undertook a forced march of immense speed northward, covering hundreds of miles in just a few days. This extraordinary maneuver was executed with the utmost secrecy, highlighting the desperation and determination of the Roman command. Meanwhile, Hasdrubal, having reached the vicinity of the Metaurus River, attempted to send messengers to Hannibal, detailing his position and proposed rendezvous. However, these crucial dispatches were intercepted by Roman scouts. This intelligence coup revealed Hasdrubal's precise location and intentions to the Roman generals, allowing them to coordinate their efforts. The two Roman consular armies converged on Hasdrubal near the Metaurus River in 207 BCE. The ensuing engagement was a brutal and decisive confrontation. Hasdrubal, finding himself outnumbered and outmaneuvered, fought with immense courage, personally leading his troops. The battle was fierce, characterized by intense hand-to-hand combat. The Roman forces, particularly Nero's contingent, executed a flanking maneuver that enveloped Hasdrubal's right wing, shattering his formations. By the end of the day, Hasdrubal's army was utterly destroyed. Hasdrubal himself, realizing the futility of further resistance and unwilling to be captured, charged into the thickest part of the Roman lines and was killed. His head was subsequently taken and, in a grim display of psychological warfare, thrown into Hannibal's camp. The Battle of the Metaurus was a turning point of profound significance. It not only prevented the feared junction of the two Barca brothers, but also eliminated Carthage's last realistic hope of reinforcing Hannibal in Italy. With Hasdrubal's army annihilated, Hannibal's strategic isolation became complete. The news of his brother's defeat and the brutal manner in which it was delivered signalled the effective end of his offensive capabilities in Italy. The tide of the Second Punic War had irrevocably shifted. The grim message delivered to Hannibal's camp, the severed head of his brother Hasdrubal, confirmed the devastating news of the Metaurus. This moment marked a profound shift in Hannibal's campaign in Italy. No longer was there any realistic hope of receiving substantial reinforcements or launching a renewed, decisive offensive against Rome. Instead, he found himself increasingly confined, in his strategic options dwindling with each passing month. Hannibal's movements became more restricted, primarily to the rugged, defensible regions of Bruttium, the toe of Italy. Here, amidst the mountains and forests, he and his veterans maintained a tenacious grip, a constant, unsettling presence that Rome could neither ignore nor easily dislodge. Despite his diminished numbers and the lack of external support, Hannibal's reputation and tactical genius continued to inspire fear and respect. He established strongholds and fortified positions, using the terrain to his advantage, transforming this corner of Italy into a prolonged theatre of attrition. His army, though reduced, remained a highly disciplined and experienced force, capable of inflicting sharp defeats on any Roman commander who grew complacent or overconfident. Yet Roman attempts to corner or decisively defeat him in Bruttium proved consistently frustrating. The very presence of Hannibal, even in his isolated state, compelled Rome to commit a substantial portion of its military resources to keep him contained. Multiple legions, often under the command of seasoned generals, were tasked with shadowing his movements, protecting the remaining loyal cities, and preventing any resurgence of Carthaginian influence. This sustained drain on Roman manpower and resources, even as the war turned in their favour elsewhere, underscored Hannibal's enduring threat. Though cut off and unable to advance, Hannibal's defiance was absolute. He continued to raid Roman territories, gather supplies, and maintain the loyalty of his remaining Italian allies, a testament to his leadership and the bonds forged over years of shared hardship. His presence in Italy, though diminished, remained a powerful symbol of resistance, a lingering wound in Rome's side that would not heal until he was finally gone. While Hannibal remained a persistent, if contained, threat in southern Italy, the true strategic initiative had shifted. It was now in the hands of Publius Cornelius Scipio, the victor of Hispania, who harboured a bold and transformative vision for ending the protracted war. Having driven Carthage from the Iberian Peninsula, Scipio understood that merely containing Hannibal in Italy was insufficient. The war, he reasoned, must be taken directly to the enemy's heartland. Despite significant opposition in the Roman Senate, which preferred a more conservative strategy of continuing to harass Hannibal in Bruttium, Scipio tirelessly advocated for an invasion of North Africa. He argued that only by threatening Carthage itself could the Romans finally compel the Carthaginian Senate to recall Hannibal, thus freeing Italy from his long and costly presence. His persuasive arguments, coupled with his undeniable military successes in Hispania, eventually swayed enough senators to grant him command and authorize the audacious expedition. In 204 BCE, Scipio, having meticulously prepared his forces, embarked from Sicily with a substantial army. This was not merely an aggressive maneuver, it was a calculated gamble designed to exploit Carthage's vulnerabilities. North Africa, unlike Italy, had not experienced the ravages of war on its home soil for many years. Its fields were fertile, its cities prosperous, and its population unaccustomed to the direct threat of a Roman legion. The strategic brilliance of Scipio's move lay in its psychological and logistical impact. An invasion of Africa would directly imperil Carthaginian territory, threatening their cities, their agricultural base, and their allies, most notably the Numidian kingdoms. The Carthaginian Senate, faced with the prospect of Rome at their very gates, would inevitably be forced to make a difficult choice: continue to support Hannibal's increasingly stagnant campaign in Italy, or prioritise the immediate defence of their homeland. Scipio correctly predicted that the preservation of Carthage itself would take precedence. The invasion was a masterstroke, a direct challenge that bypassed Hannibal's formidable presence in Italy by striking at the source of Carthaginian power. It set in motion the final act of the Second Punic War, ensuring that the conflict would soon reach its climactic conclusion, far from the fields where Hannibal had long held sway. The strategic pressure exerted by Scipio's presence on African soil proved irresistible. As Roman legions began to ravage the Carthaginian hinterland, threatening vital supply lines and allied territories, the Carthaginian Senate found itself with no alternative. The decision, though painful, was clear. Hannibal, the greatest general of his age, had to be recalled to defend his homeland. Messengers were dispatched across the sea, bearing the sombre command that would forever alter the course of the war. In 203 BCE, after 15 years spent campaigning on Italian soil, Hannibal received the order. It was a moment laden with profound, quiet resignation. For a decade and a half he'd been the master of the Italian landscape, a persistent shadow haunting the Roman Republic, undefeated in battle and a constant symbol of defiance. He had marched from the icy peaks of the Alps to the sun-drenched plains of Apulia, had shattered Roman armies, and had held a vast coalition of diverse forces together through sheer force of will and military genius. Now, all of that was to be relinquished. The vision of a defeated Rome, so long pursued, would remain unfulfilled. There was no grand victory parade, no triumphal entry into the eternal city. Instead, there was the silent, solemn preparation for departure. He gathered his veteran troops, the battle-hardened corps who had shared his triumphs and endured his hardships, many of whom had known no other home than the Roman countryside they had occupied for so long. The departure itself was likely tinged with a deep, internal melancholy. Leaving Italy meant abandoning the dream, conceding that the war could not be won on Roman territory. It was not a retreat born of defeat, but a strategic necessity, a reluctant yielding to a greater imperative. Hannibal sailed from Italy, leaving behind the land he had dominated to return to a Carthage facing imminent invasion. His formidable skills now required for a desperate defence rather than an ambitious conquest. The long, arduous chapter of his Italian campaign had finally closed. With Hannibal now on African soil, the stage was set for the final act of the long and devastating war. As before the inevitable clash, however, a brief window for peace negotiations opened, initiated by Scipio himself. The Roman general, perhaps seeking to avoid further bloodshed or to secure an advantageous peace without the risks of battle, offered terms to Carthage. These proposals were conveyed through diplomatic channels, aiming to bring an end to the conflict that had consumed both republics for nearly 2 decades. The proposed terms were predictably harsh for Carthage, reflecting Rome's dominant position. They included significant territorial concessions, particularly the relinquishing of all claims to Hispania and the Mediterranean islands. Furthermore, Carthage would be required to pay a substantial war indemnity, disarm its fleet, and acknowledge the independence of Numidia, a key Roman ally. These demands aimed to cripple Carthage's future military and economic power, ensuring Rome's supremacy in the western Mediterranean. Hannibal, as the newly appointed commander of the Carthaginian forces in Africa, found himself in a difficult position. Despite his legendary status and tactical prowess, his army was a mixed force, comprising his veterans from Italy, newly raised Carthaginian levies, and Numidian cavalry. He understood the precariousness of Carthage's situation, yet he also carried the weight of his lifelong oath and his nation's pride. He met with Scipio on the plains near Zama, a direct encounter between the two great generals. The details of their private conversation are lost to history, but the broader strokes are understood. Hannibal sought to negotiate a more lenient peace, one that would preserve more of Carthage's sovereignty and territorial integrity. However, Scipio, confident in his military advantage and representing the unyielding will of Rome, refused to compromise significantly on his initial demands. He understood that Carthage, with Roman legions threatening its capital, was in no position to dictate terms. The gap between what Scipio was willing to offer and what Hannibal felt his nation could accept proved too wide to bridge. The negotiations failed, and both generals departed from the meeting, knowing that the fate of their respective republics would now be decided on the battlefield. The stage was thus irrevocably set for the decisive confrontation at Zama. With diplomacy exhausted, the two great generals prepared for the ultimate confrontation that would determine the fate of their empires. On a plain near Zama Regia, in what is now Tunisia, the armies of Hannibal and Scipio finally met in 202 BCE. It was a clash not merely of legions and phalanxes, but of two distinct military philosophies embodied by two extraordinary minds. Hannibal arrayed his forces with his characteristic tactical acumen. In the front he placed his war elephants, intended to break the Roman lines and instill terror. Behind them stood the Carthaginian and Numidian levies, followed by his hardened veterans from Italy, forming the strongest part of his army. The cavalry, though depleted, guarded his flanks. Scipio, however, was intimately familiar with Hannibal's strategies, having studied them throughout his campaigns in Hispania. He anticipated the elephant charge and devised an innovative countermeasure. Instead of deploying his maniples in the traditional checkerboard formation, he arranged them in straight lines, creating wide lanes that ran perpendicular to his front. These lanes were camouflaged by light infantry, who were instructed to open ranks and funnel the charging elephants through these corridors, where they could be harassed and rendered ineffective without disrupting the main Roman battle lines. As the battle commenced, Hannibal's elephants thundered forward. Many were indeed channeled into Scipio's carefully prepared lanes, where they were met with javelins and loud noises, causing them to panic and turn back, some even trampling Carthaginian troops. This neutralized Hannibal's initial shock weapon and preserved the integrity of the Roman infantry. Following the elephant debacle, the infantry engaged in a brutal struggle. The Carthaginian levies fought fiercely but were eventually pushed back by the disciplined Roman legions. Hannibal's veterans, positioned in the rear, entered the fray, demonstrating their formidable experience and resilience. For a time, the battle hung in the balance, a grinding struggle of attrition and skill. The decisive moment came with the return of Scipio's cavalry, commanded by Massinissa, the Numidian king, and Laelius. Earlier in the battle they had routed the Carthaginian cavalry and pursued them from the field. Their timely return to the main engagement, striking Hannibal's infantry from the rear, shattered the Carthaginian formation. Surrounded and overwhelmed, even Hannibal's seasoned veterans could not withstand the combined assault. The Carthaginian lines broke, and a general rout ensued. The Battle of Zama resulted in a decisive Roman victory, marking the end of Hannibal's military career and effectively the end of the Second Punic War. The devastating defeat at Zama left Carthage with no option but to sue for peace. The city, once a formidable rival to Rome, now stood vulnerable and exhausted, its military power broken and its greatest general defeated. The terms imposed by Rome were predictably severe. reflecting the Romans' long-held resentment and their determination to eliminate Carthage as a geopolitical threat once and for all. The peace treaty, ratified in 201 BCE, stripped Carthage of virtually all its overseas territories. Hispania, a vital source of wealth and manpower that had fueled Hannibal's campaigns, was entirely ceded to Rome. All Carthaginian possessions in Africa outside its immediate hinterland were also lost, effectively confining its influence to a small region around the city itself. Furthermore, Carthage was forbidden from raising an army or waging war outside of Africa, and even within Africa, it required Roman permission to engage in any military action. This clause would prove particularly debilitating, leaving Carthage defenceless against the encroachments of its aggressive Numidian neighbours, particularly King Massinissa, a staunch Roman ally. Perhaps the most crippling condition was the enormous war indemnity. Carthage was obligated to pay Rome 10,000 Euboic talents of silver over a period of 50 years. This sum was colossal, and designed not only to compensate Rome for its losses, but also to keep Carthage economically subservient and unable to rebuild its military might. The sheer weight of this financial burden would strain Carthaginian resources for generations. The treaty also demanded the surrender of all Carthaginian warships, with the exception of 10 triremes, effectively dismantling its once dominant navy. Any prisoners of war and Roman deserters found in Carthaginian service were also to be handed over. For Rome, the peace treaty marked the end of the Second Punic War, and solidified its position as the undisputed dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. For Carthage, it signified a profound and irreversible decline. From a mighty maritime empire, it was reduced to a regional power, heavily constrained and constantly under the watchful eye of Rome. Either the city would continue to exist, and even experience a degree of economic recovery in the following decades, but its days as a major independent political and military force were unequivocally over. The defeat at Zama and the subsequent peace terms permanently altered the balance of power, paving the way for Rome's eventual dominion over the entire Mediterranean world. Following the crushing defeat at Zama and the imposition of a punitive peace treaty, Hannibal Barca returned to Carthage, not as a conquering hero, but as a general who had ultimately failed in his grand ambition. One might expect such a figure to retreat from public life, perhaps to mourn the loss of an empire. Yet, Hannibal, ever pragmatic and dedicated to his city, surprised many by transitioning from a military leader to a significant political figure. In 196 BCE, just 5 years after the end of the war, Hannibal was elected to the office of Suffet, one of Carthage's 2 chief magistrates. This was a remarkable turn of events for a man who had spent the majority of his adult life on campaign, demonstrating his enduring popularity and the trust the Carthaginian people still placed in his leadership, even in peacetime. As Suffet, Hannibal embarked on an ambitious program of reform. His primary objective was to restore Carthage's prosperity and stability, which had been severely undermined by the war and the harsh Roman indemnity. He recognized that the existing political and financial structures were riddled with corruption and inefficiency, hindering the city's ability to recover. His reforms focused particularly on the financial administration. He investigated and exposed widespread embezzlement by powerful aristocratic families and officials who had been enriching themselves at the state's expense. By clamping down on these corrupt practices and reorganizing the collection of taxes, Hannibal managed to significantly increase public revenue. He demonstrated that, despite the heavy Roman demands, Carthage possessed sufficient resources to meet its obligations without imposing further burdens on its citizens. Beyond financial matters, Hannibal also sought to reform the Carthaginian constitution, particularly the Council of 104, a powerful oligarchic body that often acted with impunity. He aimed to curb the council's power and make it more accountable to the people, ensuring that magistrates were chosen on merit rather than solely on family influence. These reforms, while often met with fierce resistance from the entrenched aristocracy, were designed to create a more equitable and efficient government, better equipped to guide Carthage through its period of recovery. Hannibal's political efforts were driven by the same unwavering dedication he had shown on the battlefield. He sought to strengthen Carthage from within, believing that a robust and financially sound state could eventually regain a measure of its former standing, even under the shadow of Roman dominance. His tenure as suffect revealed a different facet of his genius, an astute administrator and reformer, committed to the long-term well-being of his homeland. Despite Hannibal's dedicated efforts to rebuild Carthage through peaceful means, the memory of his past campaigns continued to cast a long, unsettling shadow over Rome. The Roman Senate, ever vigilant and deeply marked by the 2 decades of fear he had instilled, harboured a persistent suspicion. They could not easily reconcile the image of the man who had brought them to the brink of ruin with that of a mere civic administrator. Even as he reformed Carthaginian finances and stabilized its economy, Rome saw not a statesman, but a latent threat, a potential orchestrator of renewed conflict. The Carthaginian aristocrats, whose corruption Hannibal had so effectively exposed and curtailed, further fueled Roman anxieties. They saw an opportunity to rid themselves of their reform-minded suffect by appealing to Rome's lingering fears. These disgruntled factions sent envoys to Rome, subtly suggesting that Hannibal was secretly plotting a new war, perhaps forging alliances with Rome's enemies in the east. Whether these accusations held any truth or were merely a convenient pretext is a matter of historical debate. What is clear is that the Roman Senate, ever cautious, chose to believe the worst. They dispatched an embassy to Carthage around 195 BCE, with the ostensible purpose of mediating a dispute between Carthage and Massinissa, the king of Numidia and a staunch Roman ally. However, the true motive, as understood by all involved, was to demand Hannibal's surrender. Hannibal, foreseeing the inevitable, recognized that to remain in Carthage would be to invite his capture and likely execution. He understood that Carthage, weakened and bound by treaty, could not protect him from Rome's demands. And so, one quiet night, with careful secrecy, he slipped away from the city he had served so diligently. It was a clandestine departure, and a general of immense renown leaving his homeland as a hunted man. He travelled in disguise, making his way to the coast and boarding a ship bound for Tyre, the ancient mother city of Carthage in Phoenicia. This quiet flight marked the end of his direct involvement in Carthaginian affairs, initiating a new, peripatetic chapter in his life as a perpetual exile, always one step ahead of Roman retribution. The spectre of Rome's power had driven him from the battlefield, and now it drove him from his home. From Tyre, Hannibal embarked upon a new phase of his life, one characterized by constant movement and the search for a powerful patron willing to challenge Rome. His destination was the Hellenistic East, a mosaic of kingdoms carved from the empire of Alexander the Great, where ambitious rulers constantly vied for dominance. He moved through various courts, a living legend offering his unparalleled military acumen to any who would listen. His journey eventually led him to the court of Antiochus III, the formidable ruler of the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus was known as the Great, and presided over a vast domain stretching from Thrace to India. At this time, he found himself increasingly at odds with the expanding power of Rome, particularly over influence in Greece and Asia Minor. Hannibal, arriving as a seasoned veteran of Roman warfare, presented himself as an invaluable asset. He offered Antiochus a grand strategy. an ambitious plan to take the war directly to Italy, rekindling the conflict on Roman soil, much as he had done decades before. Hannibal argued that a simultaneous invasion of Italy by a powerful Seleucid army, coupled with an uprising among the still disaffected peoples of Cisalpine Gaul, could shatter Roman dominance. He also suggested leveraging his own residual influence in Carthage to stir up rebellion there, thereby forcing Rome to divide its forces. However, the political landscape of the Hellenistic world was far more intricate than the straightforward rivalry he had known with Rome. Antiochus, though powerful, was surrounded by courtiers and advisors who viewed Hannibal with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and even jealousy. His counsel, though strategically sound, was often perceived as too bold, too Carthaginian in its directness, and perhaps even threatening to the established order within the Seleucid court. Antiochus himself, while initially intrigued, only harboured a deep-seated pride and a reluctance to fully entrust his war efforts to a foreign general, especially one whose very presence might be seen as an admission of his own military shortcomings. The Seleucid king was accustomed to his own strategic vision, and often preferred to fight battles on his own terms. Hannibal's suggestions, therefore, were often met with polite consideration, but ultimately diluted or ignored. The opportunity to launch a truly decisive blow against Rome, under Hannibal's experienced guidance, began to slowly dissipate amidst the cautious politics and internal rivalries of the Seleucid court. The great general, now an advisor, found his strategic genius constrained by the very patrons he sought to serve. Despite his strategic brilliance, Hannibal's role under Antiochus III remained surprisingly marginal. He was never fully given command of a significant land army, his profound understanding of Roman tactics largely unutilized. Instead, in an unusual turn of events, the great land general found himself briefly at the helm of a Seleucid fleet. This naval command, a departure from his lifelong experience, came during a crucial phase of the Roman-Seleucid War. In 190 BCE, Hannibal commanded a squadron of Phoenician ships in a naval engagement against the Rhodian fleet, an ally of Rome off the coast of Pamphylia. The encounter, known as the Battle of the Eurymedon, saw Hannibal pitted against a skilled Rhodian admiral. Though he fought with characteristic determination, his limited experience in naval warfare combined with the superior seamanship and tactics of the Rhodians led to a defeat for the Seleucid forces. Yet this setback further diminished his standing in the eyes of Antiochus, who perhaps saw it as confirmation that Hannibal's genius was confined to land battles, or worse, that his luck had finally run out. The war on land also turned decisively against Antiochus. The Romans, under the command of Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, and with the strategic advice of his more famous brother, Scipio Africanus, inflicted a crushing defeat upon the Seleucid army at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE. This catastrophic loss effectively broke Antiochus's power and forced him to sue for peace. The subsequent Treaty of Apamea, signed in 188 BCE, imposed harsh terms on the Seleucid Empire. Among its many provisions, one clause stood out, a testament to Rome's enduring fear and relentless pursuit of its old adversary. Antiochus was explicitly required to surrender Hannibal to Roman custody. This demand made it clear that even in the distant East, Rome considered Hannibal a perpetual threat, a living symbol of defiance that could not be allowed to remain free. Faced with this inescapable condition, Hannibal had no choice but to flee once more. His time at the Seleucid court had come to an end, and he again became a fugitive, his life a relentless journey from one temporary refuge to another. He sought sanctuary in various smaller Hellenistic kingdoms, moving from Crete to Armenia, and eventually to Bithynia, forever pursued by the long arm of Roman power, which extended its reach across the ancient world. Each new court offered a brief respite, a temporary hope, before the shadow of Rome inevitably fell upon him again. After his flight from the Seleucid court, Hannibal found his final refuge in Bithynia, a smaller Hellenistic kingdom nestled in Asia Minor. Its king, Prusias I, offered the aging general sanctuary, perhaps recognizing the immense strategic value in harbouring such a renowned military mind, even if his influence was waning. For Prusias, Hannibal represented not merely a famous exile, but a potential asset in his own regional conflicts. In Bithynia, Hannibal continued to serve in a military advisory capacity, his tactical acumen undiminished by age or constant flight. He became a trusted counsellor to Prusias, helping the king navigate the complex political landscape of Asia Minor, which was increasingly dominated by Roman influence and its allies. Despite his earlier, less successful foray into naval command under Antiochus, Hannibal once again found himself involved in maritime warfare. Prusias was engaged in a conflict with Eumenes II of Pergamon, a kingdom that was a staunch ally of Rome. Hannibal, ever the innovator, devised a unique and audacious strategy for a naval battle against Eumenes. The details of this engagement, as recounted by ancient sources, reveal a flash of the old Hannibal's ingenuity. He reportedly ordered his ships to collect venomous snakes in earthen pots. When the two fleets met for battle, these pots were hurled onto the decks of Eumenes' ships, causing chaos and fear among the enemy sailors. The unexpected weapon, combined with the psychological impact of fighting against a legendary general, reportedly threw the Pergamene fleet into disarray. This unconventional tactic, a blend of psychological warfare and pragmatic resourcefulness, contributed significantly to a Bithynian naval victory against Eumenes II. This late-career triumph in an unexpected domain showcased that even in exile, far from the grand theatres of the Punic Wars, Hannibal's mind remained sharp and adaptable. He continued to be a formidable military thinker, capable of devising cunning strategies against superior forces. His service to Prusias demonstrated his enduring dedication to the art of war, even when serving a minor king in a distant land and against the allies of his old enemy. However, this small victory in Bithynia would not alter the larger geopolitical currents. The shadow of Rome, though momentarily evaded, was slowly but surely drawing closer. Even in his advanced years, living in the relative obscurity of Bithynia, Hannibal remained a spectre in the Roman imagination. The memory of his campaigns, the devastation he had wrought upon Italy, and the fear he had instilled in the Roman populace continued to resonate deeply within the Republic. Rome's fear of Hannibal was profound and enduring, a testament to his military genius and the psychological impact of his presence. This fear was not merely a historical echo, it was an active and shaping force in Roman foreign policy. Despite having defeated him definitively at Zama, despite having driven him into exile, and despite the fact that Carthage itself was no longer a major power, Rome could not rest while Hannibal lived. The mere possibility of his strategic mind being employed against them, even by a minor king, was enough to stir their relentless pursuit. Roman envoys, as equipped with the authority of the burgeoning republic, began to make demands. They pressed Prusias I of Bithynia, insisting that he surrender Hannibal. The Romans conveyed a clear message. Harbouring their greatest enemy was an act that would not be tolerated. Prusias, a king of a smaller state, found himself in an unenviable position, caught between his guest, a military legend, and the overwhelming power of Rome. The Roman demand was not a request, it was an ultimatum. Their power had grown exponentially since the Second Punic War, and their influence now stretched across the Mediterranean world. They were not accustomed to being defied, especially when it came to a matter that touched upon their deepest national trauma. The relentless nature of Roman power, its unyielding determination to secure its interests and eliminate perceived threats, was on full display. For Rome, Hannibal was not merely an old man, he was a symbol of an existential threat. His very existence, even in distant exile, represented a potential spark that could ignite new dangers. The Roman Senate and its generals understood that a mind capable of crossing the Alps with elephants and inflicting such crushing defeats could never truly be dismissed, regardless of age or circumstance. Their pursuit was not born of petty vengeance, but from a calculated, cold assessment of persistent danger. This unwavering resolve sealed Hannibal's fate, leaving him with increasingly few options in a world dominated by his former adversaries. The relentless pressure from Rome left Hannibal with few places to find refuge, and as Roman envoys continued to demand his surrender from Prusias I, the aging general understood that his time was drawing to a close. Around the year 183 BCE, in the Bithynian town of Libissa, the final act of his extraordinary life unfolded. Hannibal had long carried a ring, which according to some accounts contained a hidden compartment holding poison. It was a discreet measure, a contingency planned perhaps for just such a moment when capture seemed inevitable. Faced with the prospect of being delivered into the hands of his lifelong adversaries, to be paraded in a Roman triumph or suffer a more ignominious fate, Hannibal chose a different path. He ingested the poison. His death was not a dramatic battlefield demise, nor was it the culmination of a political assassination. Instead, it was a quiet, deliberate act, performed in a distant land, far from the battlefields that had defined his youth and middle age. This choice represented a final assertion of control, a refusal to allow his enemies the ultimate satisfaction of his capture. In taking his own life, Hannibal denied Rome its desired prize. It was a final, silent defiance against the power that had pursued him across continents and for decades. His life, marked by tumultuous campaigns, strategic brilliance, and relentless struggle against the rising Roman Republic, ended not with a roar, but with a quiet, decisive gesture. This solitary end in Libissa brought to a close a life that had profoundly shaped the ancient world. It was a poignant conclusion for a man who had once brought Rome to its knees. His death, by his own hand, underscored his unyielding spirit, into demonstrating that even in his final moments he remained master of his own destiny, free from the grasp of his formidable foes. His long and arduous journey had reached its ultimate stillness. The news of Hannibal's death would have travelled slowly, yet with immense significance, across the vast distances of the Mediterranean world. When the reports finally reached Rome, a palpable sense of relief would have settled over the Republic. For generations, the name of Hannibal had been synonymous with terror, a spectre that haunted the collective Roman consciousness. He was the bogeyman, the master strategist who had brought Rome to the brink of destruction. His passing marked the quiet closing of a long and terrifying chapter in Roman history. Even in his advanced age and diminished circumstances, the mere existence of Hannibal, and still plotting and advising kings in distant lands, represented a persistent, albeit fading, threat. The Roman Senate had never truly rested easy while he drew breath. Their relentless pursuit, even to the very fringes of their influence, underscored the depth of their apprehension. With Hannibal gone, the Republic could finally exhale. The man who had decimated legions at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, the general who had encamped near their very gates, was no more. The fear of Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, which had echoed through Roman households for decades, could at last be laid to rest. This was not a moment for public celebration or triumphal arches in his honour, for Hannibal was an enemy, not a conquered foe brought back in chains. Rather, it was a profound, internal collective sigh of relief. The Mediterranean powers, many of whom had felt the shifting currents of his strategic movements, would also have noted his demise. For the Hellenistic kings, he had been a potential ally, a formidable weapon against Rome, or a dangerous competitor. His death simplified the geopolitical landscape, removing a wild card whose genius could unpredictably alter the balance of power. For Rome, however, the impact was most profound. It meant the permanent removal of the greatest military mind they had ever faced, a figure whose shadow had stretched across their burgeoning empire for nearly half a century. His death confirmed the ultimate triumph of Roman resilience, even if that triumph was achieved through attrition and the passage of time rather than a final direct confrontation. The longest and most personal vendetta in Roman history had finally concluded. Even after Hannibal's death, the deep-seated Roman animosity towards Carthage did not dissipate. The memory of the Punic Wars, particularly the harrowing campaigns of Hannibal, remained etched into the Roman psyche. Despite Carthage's drastically diminished status following the Second Punic War, confined to a small territory and burdened by heavy indemnities, a powerful faction within Rome continued to view its existence as an unacceptable affront and a potential future threat. This sentiment was most famously embodied by Cato the Elder, who concluded every speech in the Senate, regardless of its topic, with the insistent declaration, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. This unwavering conviction, born from a generation that had lived through Hannibal's invasions, slowly gained traction. Decades after Hannibal had passed from the world stage, in 149 BCE, Rome manufactured a pretext for war. Carthage, struggling to defend itself against incursions from its Numidian neighbours, was accused of violating the terms of the treaty established after Zama. This led to the Third Punic War, a conflict far less epic in scale than its predecessors, yet utterly decisive in its outcome. The war culminated in the complete siege and destruction of the city of Carthage in 146 BCE. After a protracted and brutal 3-year siege, Roman forces, led by Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, Hannibal's conqueror at Zama, finally breached the city walls. What followed was a week of horrific street-by-street fighting, reducing the once proud metropolis to rubble. The surviving Carthaginian population was enslaved, and the city itself was systematically levelled. Legends claim that the Romans sowed salt into the fields to prevent anything from ever growing there again, though historical evidence for this particular act remains debated. Regardless, the intent was clear: the complete and utter obliteration of Carthage. This act marked the ultimate fulfillment of Rome's dominance and the final erasure of its ancient rival. The city that had birthed Hannibal, the formidable power that had challenged Rome for supremacy in the Mediterranean, ceased to exist. With Carthage gone, Rome stood unchallenged, solidifying its position as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world, forever free from the shadow of its most enduring enemy. Hannibal Barca, and beyond his dramatic narrative, stands as a towering figure in military history due to his profound innovations and tactical brilliance. His methods were not merely effective, they were revolutionary, setting precedents that would be studied and emulated for centuries. Central to his genius was an unparalleled mastery of combined arms, particularly his sophisticated use of cavalry. While other commanders recognized the value of horsemen, Hannibal integrated them seamlessly into his battle plans, using them not just for skirmishing or pursuit, but as the decisive hammer in concert with his infantry anvil. The Battle of Cannae remains the most celebrated example, where his Numidian and Celtic cavalry executed a perfectly timed double envelopment, shattering the Roman legions from the rear. This coordinated manoeuvre, he'd often termed the double envelopment, became a textbook example of tactical perfection. Furthermore, Hannibal possessed an intuitive understanding of terrain and its psychological impact. He did not merely fight on a battlefield, he utilized it, turning natural features into allies. The ambush at Lake Trasimene, where he concealed his entire army along a narrow defile, or his calculated use of the high ground at Trebia to lure the Romans into a disadvantageous river crossing, exemplify this skill. He saw the landscape as an extension of his strategic chessboard, manipulating it to create traps and maximize his force's advantages while exacerbating his enemy's weaknesses. His psychological warfare was equally subtle and devastating. Hannibal understood the morale of his troops and the fear in his enemies. His legendary march over the Alps, though costly, was a profound act of psychological warfare, designed to shock and demoralize Rome before a single major battle was fought. He fostered loyalty and cohesion among a diverse mercenary army through leadership and shared hardship, a remarkable feat in itself. Conversely, he relentlessly exploited Roman overconfidence and their rigid adherence to traditional tactics, sowing doubt and terror with each successive victory. Hannibal's influence on military thought is enduring. His strategies and tactics, meticulously documented by ancient historians, have been analysed by military leaders from Scipio Africanus himself to Napoleon and even modern strategists. He demonstrated that meticulous planning, adaptability, and an understanding of human psychology could overcome numerical superiority, or leaving an indelible mark on the art of warfare. Beyond the strategic mind and tactical brilliance, Hannibal Barca possessed a quiet strength of character that defined his leadership. His personal qualities were as instrumental to his enduring campaign as any military innovation. Foremost among these was his extraordinary resilience. From the arduous crossing of the Alps, which decimated a significant portion of his forces, to the prolonged grinding war of attrition in Italy, Hannibal faced setbacks that would have broken lesser commanders. Yet, he consistently adapted, finding new ways to sustain his army, resupply his men, and maintain offensive pressure, even when resources from Carthage dwindled. His ability to absorb immense losses and continue fighting with an unyielding spirit speaks to an inner fortitude that few historical figures have matched. He never succumbed to despair, even when isolated and outnumbered, demonstrating a profound mental toughness. This resilience was inextricably linked to his remarkable capacity to inspire loyalty. His army was a melting pot of diverse cultures, Numidians, Iberians, Gauls, and various other mercenaries, each with their own languages and customs. For over a decade, far from home, with inconsistent pay, and often facing desperate circumstances, this heterogeneous force remained remarkably cohesive and devoted to their commander. This was not achieved through brute force or fear, but through shared hardship, consistent leadership, and a palpable sense of purpose. Hannibal shared the privations of his men, often sleeping on the ground among them, and he understood their individual needs and motivations. His presence alone seems to have been a powerful binding agent, fostering a collective identity that transcended ethnic divisions. His unwavering determination was a constant through every phase of his life, from his youthful oath to his final moments in exile. Once committed to a course of action, Hannibal pursued it with singular focus. This determination was not a reckless stubbornness, but a deeply ingrained resolve, born from his early vows and hardened by years of conflict. Even when the tide turned decisively against him, his spirit remained unbroken, his mind still plotting and planning, seeking any advantage, however small. This quiet, persistent will, more than any individual victory, truly defined the man. It was this steadfast character that allowed him to endure, to lead, and to leave such an indelible mark on history. For the Romans, Hannibal Barca was not merely an adversary, He was a force of nature, an embodiment of existential dread. His name itself became synonymous with terror whispered in hushed tones, capable of striking fear into the heart of the Republic. The phrase, Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, was more than a literal warning. It was a psychological shorthand for imminent, overwhelming danger, used for centuries after his time to describe any grave threat. The initial shock of his invasion, the unprecedented crossing of the Alps with war elephants, immediately established him as a commander unlike any Rome had ever faced. Then came the series of devastating defeats, Trebia, Trasimene, and most catastrophically, Cannae. These were not just military losses, they were profound humiliations that shattered Roman confidence and laid bare the vulnerability of their seemingly invincible legions. The sheer audacity of his strategy, the ruthlessness of his victories, and his prolonged presence on Italian soil, raiding and undermining Roman authority, fostered a deep-seated paranoia that permeated Roman society for decades. Mothers would calm their crying children with the threat of Hannibal's arrival, illustrating the profound and personal nature of this fear. Yet, amidst this palpable terror, there was an undeniable, if grudging, respect. Roman historians, even those writing long after the Punic Wars, often acknowledged Hannibal's extraordinary military genius. Livy, for instance, while naturally biased towards Rome, nevertheless portrays Hannibal as a commander of immense skill and intellect. The very fact that Rome had to fundamentally alter its military strategy, adopting the Fabian tactics of attrition to avoid direct confrontation, speaks volumes about the awe-inspiring effectiveness of Hannibal's methods. Scipio Africanus, his ultimate vanquisher, is said to have held Hannibal in high regard, engaging him in a legendary, if perhaps apocryphal conversation, years later, where they debated the greatest generals of all time. This respect was not born of affection, but of a sober recognition of his unparalleled abilities. He forced Rome to confront its weaknesses, to adapt, and ultimately to become stronger. In a strange paradox, the man who brought Rome to its knees also inadvertently contributed to its future imperial might, as the lessons learned in resisting him shaped the legions and the strategic thinking that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. Hannibal was the shadow that loomed large, but even in that shadow, the Romans saw the formidable brilliance of their most feared opponent. The influence of Hannibal Barca stretches far beyond the ancient world, echoing through centuries of military thought and practice. His campaigns, meticulously documented by ancient historians, continue to serve as foundational texts in military academies and staff colleges across the globe. Generations of commanders, from Napoleon Bonaparte to Norman Schwarzkopf, have studied his strategies, seeking to unravel the secrets of his unparalleled success against a numerically superior foe. His legacy is particularly profound in the areas of strategic planning and operational execution. The audacious crossing of the Alps, a logistical marvel in itself, demonstrated an unparalleled grasp of geography and the ability to project power over vast, challenging terrains. His mastery of combined arms tactics, particularly evident at Cannae, where he encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman army, remains a textbook example of tactical brilliance. He understood how to integrate cavalry, infantry, and even terrain to achieve decisive results, often against overwhelming odds. Beyond tactics, Hannibal's leadership qualities offer enduring lessons. His ability to maintain the loyalty and cohesion of a diverse mercenary army, far from home and deprived of consistent reinforcement for over a decade, speaks to an extraordinary charisma and an innate understanding of human motivation. He managed logistics with remarkable efficiency, sustaining his forces in hostile territory through plunder, local alliances, and careful resource management. His innovative approach to warfare challenged conventional wisdom and forced his enemies to adapt or perish. He utilized psychological warfare, propaganda, and deception to great effect, demoralizing his opponents and sowing discord. These elements, combined with his tactical genius, secure his place among the pantheon of history's greatest military commanders. He is often ranked alongside figures like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, not merely for his victories, but for the depth and originality of his strategic thought. The principles he employed, though applied in an ancient context, remain remarkably relevant, offering timeless insights into the art of war and the complexities of command. As the echoes of ancient conflicts fade into the stillness of night, the figure of Hannibal Barca remains etched into the fabric of history. His life, a tapestry woven with threads of audacious ambition, strategic brilliance, and profound personal sacrifice, transcends the simple narrative of a Punic general. He stands not merely as a conqueror or a tactician, but as a testament to the indomitable spirit of human determination. From the solemn oath of his youth to the quiet solitude of his final moments, Hannibal's journey was one of relentless pursuit, marked by both glorious triumphs and the poignant weight of ultimate defeat. His story is a poignant reminder that even the most formidable wills can be shaped by the relentless march of time and the unforgiving currents of geopolitical power. Yet, his legacy endures, not only in the annals of military theory, but in the broader human narrative of resilience against overwhelming odds. He embodied a fierce loyalty to his homeland, a profound sense of duty that guided his every action, even when hope seemed distant. His life, a complex interplay of personal genius and external circumstances, invites us to reflect on the nature of ambition, the cost of conflict, and the intricate dance between individual will and historical destiny. In the quiet contemplation of his long and eventful life, we're reminded of how deeply the past resonates within the present. The whispers of Carthage, the thunder of Roman legions, and the strategic brilliance of Hannibal Barca all contribute to the rich tapestry of human experience, offering timeless lessons that continue to unfold in the stillness of our historical memory. And so, the story of Hannibal, a tale of enduring power and quiet tragedy, gently fades into the vast expanse of time, leaving behind only the soft, persistent hum of history itself.